The police cruiser's lights flash against Diane Matthews' living room curtains at precisely 7:46 on a Saturday morning. She lowered her coffee mug and peered through the blinds, heart racing as she watched Officer Ramirez approach Frank Miller's property next door. Frank sat frozen atop his John Deere tractor, confusion etched across his weathered face as the officer gestured for him to cut the engine. Standing triumphantly on her perfectly manicured lawn was Evelyn Porter, clipboard in hand, phone still clutched to her ear, a smug smile spreading across her thin lips. Everyone in Oak Ridge Estates knew Evelyn as Hewa Karen, a nickname she'd earned through 5 relentless years as Homeowners Association president. Diane watched the scene unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination. Poor Frank had simply been clearing his back acre, land that had been in his family for generations, long before Oak Ridge Estates had sprouted up around it. Noise ordinance violation, Evelyn announced loudly enough for the entire block to hear. Section 14, paragraph 3 clearly states no mechanical equipment before 8 a.m. on weekends. She thrust her clipboard toward Officer Ramirez, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Frank climbed down from his tractor, removed his work gloves, and spoke calmly. "Officer, my property is agricultural zoned. The HOA bylaws don't apply to this section of my land." Evelyn's smile faltered for just a moment. "Absolutely preposterous. Every property in Oak Ridge Estates falls under our jurisdiction." Diane couldn't help herself. She slipped on her sandals and stepped outside, joining several other neighbors who had emerged to witness the confrontation. "Actually," Frank continued, pulling a folded document from his pocket, "when the development was built in 2010, my family negotiated an exclusion clause for this back section. It's all legal and filed with the county." Officer Ramirez reviewed the document, then handed it back to Frank with a nod. "He's right, ma'am. This portion of the property isn't subject to your HOA rules. There's no violation here." Evelyn's face flushed crimson. "This is ridiculous. The noise is disturbing everyone's peaceful Saturday morning." "Doesn't bother me," called out Ted Johnson from across the street. "I rather like it," added Mrs. Santiago, who had lived next to Frank for years. "Reminds me of my childhood on my grandparents' farm." Evelyn clutched her clipboard tighter, knuckles white. "This isn't over, Frank. Not by a long shot." She turned sharply and marched back toward her Tudor-style home at the entrance to the neighborhood. The largest house in Oak Ridge Estates, strategically positioned so she could monitor everyone coming and going. As the neighbors dispersed and Officer Ramirez departed with an apologetic wave, Diane approached Frank. "Sorry about that. She's been on a rampage lately." Frank shrugged. "Been dealing with Evelyn for years. This is just the beginning, though. Ward elections are next month, and word is she's worried about losing her position." "To who?" Diane asked. "Margaret Chen is running against her. First real competition Evelyn's had in years." Diane smiled. Now that would be interesting. What neither of them realized was that Evelyn had paused at her front door, watching their conversation with narrowed eyes. She pulled out her phone and made a note. Frank Miller, potential troublemaker. Diane Matthews, possible accomplice. The HOA meeting next Tuesday would address both of them, she decided. No one challenged Evelyn Porter and walked away unscathed. Tuesday evening's HOA meeting transformed the Oak Ridge Estates Community Center into a battlefield. Evelyn Porter arrived 15 minutes early, arranging her materials with military precision across the board table. She wore her power suit, navy blue with sharp shoulder pads, and pearl earrings that caught the fluorescent light as she moved. "Special agenda item tonight," she informed her loyal board members as they filtered in. "Property violations requiring immediate attention." By 7 p.m., the room had filled beyond capacity. Residents stood along the back wall, an unusual turnout that made Evelyn purse her lips. She tapped her gavel with unnecessary force. "First order of business. Landscaping violations at 1542 Maple Drive. The Matthews residence." Diane straightened in her chair, caught off guard. She hadn't received any violation notices. Evelyn clicked to a PowerPoint slide showing Diane's front yard. "These native wildflowers violate Section 8 of our bylaws. All visible plantings must be from the approved vegetation list." "Those are endangered monarch butterfly habitats," Diane protested, rising from her seat. "They're specifically protected by state environmental guidelines that supersede HOA regulations." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Furthermore," Diane continued, gaining confidence, "the Sustainable Landscaping Act of 2022 explicitly states that HOAs cannot prohibit drought-resistant native species. I have the full documentation here." She held up a folder. Margaret Chen, a retired environmental lawyer and Evelyn's election opponent, nodded approvingly from the second row. Evelyn cleared her throat. "We'll review your documentation." Moving on to item 2, unauthorized structures at 1550 Maple Drive. The Miller property. The screen displayed Frank's backyard, specifically his recently installed beehives. These structures were erected without Architectural Review Committee approval, Evelyn stated flatly. They must be removed within 7 days. Frank stood, his usually calm demeanor showing signs of strain. Those beehives are on my agricultural zone portion, as you well know after Saturday's incident. Additionally, the State Apiary Protection Act classifies beehives as agricultural equipment, not structures. The proximity to other properties presents a safety hazard, Evelyn countered. Actually, interjected Margaret Chen. Standing to join the conversation, Mr. Miller's beehives exceed the required setback distance by 12 feet. And given the colony collapse crisis, local municipalities are encouraging urban beekeeping. The town council just passed a resolution last month supporting such initiatives. The room had grown unusually quiet. Evelyn's carefully orchestrated meeting was spiraling beyond her control. Perhaps, suggested Ted Johnson from the back, we should discuss the swimming pool that appeared in your backyard last summer, Evelyn. I don't recall seeing that go through the Architectural Review Committee. Evelyn's face paled. That was an emergency installation. Medical necessity. My doctor recommended hydrotherapy for my back. Yet when the Paddle family requested permission for a therapeutic hot tub for their daughter's juvenile arthritis, you personally denied it, Margaret noted, consulting her tablet, citing aesthetic concerns. More whispers rippled through the room. Evelyn rapped her gavel sharply. We're getting off topic. This meeting is about current violations, not past decisions. Perhaps it should be about consistent application of the rules, Margaret replied calmly. Consistency and transparency are what I'm advocating for in my campaign platform. Evelyn's eyes narrowed dangerously. Election discussion is scheduled for next month's meeting. Now returning to the agenda. But the meeting had already slipped from her grasp. Residents were openly discussing examples of Evelyn's selective enforcement. The tension in the room was palpable. As the meeting dissolved into multiple conversations, Diane noticed Evelyn furiously typing on her phone. Through the chaos, their eyes met briefly. Evelyn's gaze cold and calculating. Diane felt a chill despite the stuffy room. She's not going to let this go, Frank murmured beside her. When cornered, Evelyn fights twice as hard. What do you think she'll do next? Diane asked. Something we won't see coming, he replied grimly. That's always been her strategy. Outside in the parking lot, Evelyn was already making calls. If she couldn't win through the usual channels, she simply changed the battlefield altogether. No one had ever outmaneuvered Evelyn Porter in her own neighborhood, and no one ever would, especially not with Election Day approaching. The anonymous letter arrived in every Oak Ridge Estates mailbox exactly 8 days after the contentious HOA meeting. Diane stared at the expensive cream-colored stationery with its carefully printed message, Emergency Community ALERT, Health Hazards in Our Neighborhood. The letter detailed dangerous allergic reactions reported by multiple residents due to unregulated beekeeping and invasive plant species that were reducing property values by an estimated 15%. Though unsigned, everyone recognized Evelyn's distinctive writing style, dramatic capitalizations, excessive quotation marks, and precise percentages pulled from thin air. Diane's phone buzzed with a text from Frank. Have you seen this garbage? She's gone too far. Before Diane could respond, another message appeared in the neighborhood group chat, this one from Margaret Chen. Impromptu community gathering at my house, 7 p.m. tonight. Ring the letter. By 6:45, Margaret's spacious living room was filling with concerned neighbors. Diane arrived with Frank, both surprised by the turnout, nearly 30 residents, many they'd never seen at official HOA meetings. I've consulted with colleagues from my environmental law days, Margaret announced once everyone had settled. These accusations about health hazards constitute potential defamation if we can prove they're knowingly false. We can definitely prove it, said Dr. Lakshmi Patel, rising from her seat. As the only board-certified allergist in this neighborhood, I can state professionally that native wildflowers pose significantly lower allergy risks than the non-native ornamental plants on Evelyn's approved list, and honeybees rarely cause allergic reactions. They're generally non-aggressive unless threatened. Ted Johnson spoke up next. My cousin's a real estate appraiser. He's willing to provide a written statement that diverse landscaping and ecological initiatives like beekeeping actually increase property values in today's market, sometimes by up to 7%. But why is she doing this? Asked a newer resident. What does she gain from controlling our yards and lives? Mrs. Santiago, who had lived in Oak Ridge since its founding, adjusted her glasses. Follow the money, dear. Evelyn's husband owns Porter Landscaping Services, the only company on the HOA's approved vendors list. Every violation notice, every forced renovation. It all funnels business to them. Stunned silence fell across the room. That can't be legal, someone murmured. It's a conflict of interest at minimum, Margaret confirmed. but it's been carefully managed through proxies and separate LLC names. It took some digging to connect the dots. So what do we do? Frank asked, voicing everyone's question. Margaret smiled. First, we respond to misinformation with facts. I drafted a community response letter with citations to relevant laws and scientific studies. She handed out copies. Second, we show up to the next HOA meeting in full force. And third, her smile widened, we request the HOA financial records for the past 5 years. Diane frowned. Can we do that? State law requires HOAs to make financial records available to members upon request. They have 10 business days to comply. Margaret distributed another handout. Here's the formal request template. I suggest we all submit identical copies tomorrow. The energy in the room shifted from frustration to determined action. As neighbors broke into discussion groups, Diane noticed a figure through the window, quickly ducking behind a hedge across the street. We're being watched, she whispered to Frank. Evelyn's recruited spies before, he replied quietly. Probably her nephew, he's done her dirty work in the past. Later that night, as Diane turned off her porch light, she noticed a car slowly cruising by her house, the third time in an hour. The driver's face was hidden in shadow, but the distinctive pearl earrings caught the moonlight. Diane's phone rang, Frank calling. Check your email, he said without preamble. Evelyn just called an emergency HOA board meeting for tomorrow night. Only board members allowed in a residence. Can she do that? Technically, yes, but it's unusual. Something's happening. What do you think they'll discuss? Nothing good, Frank replied grimly. But Margaret has an insider on the board who'll tell us everything. Meanwhile, did you notice the survey markers that appeared along your property line today? Diane felt her stomach tighten. No. What survey markers? The emergency board meeting lasted until nearly midnight. By 7 a.m. the next morning, Diane's inbox contained an official HOA notice that made her coffee mug slip from her fingers, splashing dark liquid across her kitchen floor. Community-wide infrastructure improvement project. Oak Ridge Estates will commence installation of upgraded drainage systems across all rear property lines beginning Monday. Access easements of 15 feet will be enforced per original development plat maps. Frank burst through her side gate moments later, waving an identical notice. This is a direct attack. The drainage project runs exactly along my agricultural zone boundary. And right through my wildflower meadow, Diane added grimly. Frank paced her kitchen. I checked the county records first thing this morning. There is a drainage easement in the original plans, but it's only 5 feet, not 15. And it was never activated because the developer installed the system in a different location. So she's lying? Stretching the truth, Frank clarified. The easement exists on paper, just not as she's describing it, and certainly not for the purpose she's claiming. Diane's phone lit up with Margaret's caller ID. Emergency meeting at my house in 30 minutes, Margaret said without preamble. Bring your property surveys and deed documents. Margaret's dining room had transformed into a war room. Laptops and paper documents covered every surface. Dr. Patel was on speakerphone with a civil engineer friend, while Ted Johnson huddled with a real estate attorney. This is a clear case of easement misuse, the attorney explained to the gathered neighbors. Easements must be used for their intended purpose. If the drainage system already exists elsewhere, this new project is potentially fraudulent. Margaret nodded. We've discovered something else. She clicked through to a document on her laptop. The construction company awarded this no-bid emergency contract. Oak Ridge Infrastructure Solutions was registered as an LLC just 3 weeks ago. Its managing member is James Porter, Evelyn's son. Gasps echoed around the room. So she's fabricating an emergency project to funnel HOA funds to her family? Diane asked incredulously. And simultaneously destroy the beehives and wildflowers she couldn't eliminate through normal channels, Frank added. Margaret stood. I've filed an emergency injunction with the county. She displayed the legal document. But we need more. We need evidence of deliberate misrepresentation and self-dealing. Mrs. Santiago raised her hand. My grandson works for the county permit office. He says no drainage permits have been filed for Oak Ridge Estates. And I've got something, said a quiet voice from the corner. Everyone turned to see Robert Green, the board's treasurer, looking uncomfortable but determined. I never approved any emergency funds for infrastructure. The board meeting minutes have been falsified. A buzz of excitement swept through the room. For the first time, they had a board member willing to speak against Evelyn. We're getting somewhere, Margaret said. But Evelyn's scheduled the work to begin Monday morning. That's tomorrow. The injunction might not be processed in time. Then we physically block them, Frank said firmly. It's our property. They can't just enter without proper documentation. That could get ugly, Diane warned. It's already ugly, Frank replied. Their planning was interrupted by the sound of heavy machinery rumbling down the street. Neighbors rushed to the windows to see excavators and trenchers moving slowly toward the community's back entrance. "They're starting today, not Monday," Ted exclaimed. "She's trying to get ahead of any legal challenge." The group scattered in panicked determination. Frank ran for his property. Diane and several others headed to the equipment staging area. Margaret grabbed her legal documents and phone. By the time Diane reached the staging area, a small crowd had already gathered. Construction workers in safety vests looked confused as residents demanded to see permits and authorization documents. Evelyn arrived minutes later, stepping out of her Mercedes with thunder in her expression. "This is an authorized IHOA project. Anyone interfering will face legal consequences. Where are your county permits?" Diane challenged. "And your environmental impact studies for disrupting protected habitats?" added Dr. Patel. The county commissioner's hearing room buzzed with anticipation. 3 days after the construction showdown, Oak Ridge Estates residents packed the public seating area. Evelyn sat rigidly in the front row, her attorney whispering urgently in her ear. Across the aisle, Margaret Chenham organized her documents beside the county's legal counsel. "This emergency hearing will address the petition to suspend the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association board pending investigation of alleged violations," announced Commissioner Garcia, bringing the room to order. "We'll hear from both sides, beginning with the county's findings." The county investigator approached the podium. "Our preliminary review has identified multiple concerns: improper financial allocations, failure to maintain transparent records, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and potential misuse of AHOA funds. Most troubling is the apparent attempt to use a fabricated infrastructure project to target specific residents." Evelyn's attorney stood. "These are simply misunderstandings that have been blown out of proportion by political opponents. My client has dedicated years to serving this community." "Is it also a misunderstanding that Mrs. Porter failed to disclose her family's financial connections to AHOA vendors?" Commissioner Garcia asked pointedly. "Any such arrangements were properly disclosed in the appropriate documentation," the attorney insisted. Robert Green raised his hand and was recognized. "As treasurer, I can state unequivocally that no such disclosures exist in our financial records." The momentum shifted palpably away from Evelyn. Her carefully constructed Cayman was crumbling brick by bureaucratic brick. The hearing continued for nearly 2 hours. Residents testified about selective enforcement, retaliatory actions, and years of Evelyn's iron-fisted rule. Frank presented documentation about the falsified easement claims. Diane shared photographs of the survey markers that had mysteriously appeared on her property. When the vote came, it was unanimous. The current AHOA board was suspended pending a full investigation. An interim board would be appointed with elections to be held within 60 days. Additionally, all current AHOA rules enforcement would be paused during the transition. "This isn't over," Evelyn hissed as she brushed past Diane in the hallway afterward. "You have no idea what you started." "Actually, you started it," Diane replied calmly, with a noise complaint about a tractor on agricultural land. Evelyn's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. "I built this community. I protected our property values when no one else cared. Without me, watch how quickly Oak Ridge Estates deteriorates." Before Diane could respond, Margaret appeared. "The commissioner wants to speak with us about the interim board appointments." As they walked away, Frank joined them. "Don't underestimate her," he warned. "Evelyn always has a backup plan." That backup plan became evident the very next morning. Residents awoke to find "for sale" signs planted in front of Evelyn's house and 3 other properties belonging to her closest allies on the board. By afternoon, local real estate websites featured listings describing Oak Ridge Estates as a community in transition with uncertain management and potential for declining property values. The strategic damage to the neighborhood's reputation was clever and difficult to counter. "She's trying to create a self-fulfilling prophecy," Margaret explained at an emergency meeting in her living room. "If she can trigger a selling panic and drive down home values, she'll point to it as proof that her leadership was necessary." "Can she actually hurt our property values that quickly?" a worried resident asked. "Not if we stay calm and organized," Margaret assured everyone. "I've already contacted those realtors to correct the misleading descriptions, and I suggest we create our own narrative, one that highlights our community's positive transformation." Diane volunteered to create a neighborhood newsletter showcasing improvement projects and community events. Frank offered to host a farmer's market featuring honey from his hives and produce from his garden. Others proposed a community cleanup day, a plant exchange, and family movie nights in the common area. As the meeting concluded, Diane's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your property line. Now." She and Frank rushed to the border between the properties where the survey stakes had previously been placed. The stakes were gone, replaced by freshly dug holes along the entire length of both properties. "What was here?" Diane asked, kneeling to examine the disturbed soil. Frank reached into one hole and pulled out a small plastic object. Trail camera, he said grimly. Motion activated. Weatherproof. They've been watching us. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom, setting a ripple of murmurs through the gallery. 6 weeks had passed since Evelyn's lawsuit bombshell, and despite hiring the best attorney they could afford, Diane and Frank had failed to get the case thrown out. Evelyn's smile gleamed with satisfaction as she leaned toward her attorney. The lawsuit claiming property damage, nuisance violations, and reckless endangerment through apiary mismanagement would proceed to discovery. Outside the courthouse, Margaret met them with determined optimism. This isn't surprising. Dismissals are rare at this stage. But now we go on offense. How? Diane asked, overwhelmed by the legal jargon and mounting attorney fees. She has photos, video surveillance, and 3 so-called experts ready to testify about imaginary damages. And unlimited resources to drive this out, Frank added grimly. Porter Landscaping just secured the maintenance contract for Lakeside Manor, the biggest development in the county. Margaret's expression shifted. That's interesting timing. Lakeside's previous company had a 3-year contract that shouldn't have expired yet. That evening, Diane's doorbell rang. She opened it to find Mrs. Santiago clutching a thick manila envelope. My grandson, she explained, stepping inside and closing the door quickly. He works in the county contracts office. He found something you should see. Inside the envelope were copies of bid documents for the Lakeside Manor contract. Porter Landscaping's bid wasn't just competitive, it was significantly below market rate, almost ensuring a loss on the project. Why would James Porter bid so low he'd lose money? Diane wondered aloud. Because it's not about the contract itself, Frank said when they conferenced him in. It's about who sits on the Lakeside Manor AHOA board. Further investigation revealed that 2 Lakeside board members, Walter Simmons and Patricia Delgado, also served on the County Planning Commission. The same commission currently reviewing permits for new housing developments on land adjacent to Frank's agricultural property. The pieces were fitting together into a disturbing puzzle of influence and favors. She's working all the angles, Margaret observed during their strategy session. Creating connections, trading favors, building a network that strengthens her position both against you personally and for her family's business interests. I can't keep fighting this, Diane admitted, reviewing her depleted savings. The legal fees alone will bankrupt me before we even get to trial. We need to change the game, Frank suggested. She's winning by driving us through a system where money and connections matter more than facts. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. What we need is public exposure. Sunshine is the best disinfectant for corruption. Their opportunity arrived unexpectedly the following week. A local news channel was producing a special report on the changing face of suburban governance and wanted to feature Oak Ridge Estates as an example of HOA reform. Absolutely not, Evelyn told the producer who called her. Our community's private matters aren't appropriate for public consumption. But she couldn't stop others from speaking. Margaret, as interim board president, welcomed the reporter. Residents shared stories of Evelyn's regime. Former contractors described the pressure to hire Porter Landscaping's subcontractors. Robert Green provided financial records showing questionable allocations. The reporter, sensing a bigger story than expected, dug deeper. She uncovered connections between Porter Landscaping's contracts and zoning decisions favorable to Evelyn's allies. She documented the timeline of the fraudulent drainage project and the subsequent lawsuit against the very residents who had exposed it. The night before the segment was scheduled to air, Diane received a text from an unknown number. Check your email now. The message contained a single video file, footage from one of Evelyn's trail cameras. But instead of showing Diane's property, it showed Evelyn and County Commissioner Blackwell in Frank's orchard after dark, examining the beehives while discussing making the problem disappear. The commissioner explicitly mentioned delaying the injunction that would have stopped the drainage project. Is this real? Diane asked Frank when he arrived to view the video. Absolutely, he confirmed. That's my property, and this conversation happened the night before the construction equipment arrived early. But who sent it? The answer came the next morning, James Porter, Evelyn's son, standing on Diane's porch, looking deeply uncomfortable. Oak Ridge Estates blossomed over the next 2 months, literally and figuratively. Without Evelyn's restrictive landscaping rules, front yards transformed with native plants, vegetable gardens, and pollinator patches. Frank's honey production doubled with the increased flower diversity. Diane's wildflower meadow became a neighborhood attraction, with families bringing children to learn about butterflies and bees. The interim board under Margaret's leadership operated with unprecedented transparency. Meeting minutes were posted online within 24 hours. Financial records became accessible to all residents. The Architectural Review Committee now included a rotating position for regular homeowners to participate. It's how community governance should work, Margaret told Diane over coffee on a bright Saturday morning. Serving the residents, not controlling them. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by Ted Johnson rushing into the coffee shop, tablet in hand. "You need to see this," he said, sliding into their booth. Lakeside Manor just announced their new community manager. The tablet displayed a press release with Evelyn Porter's photo prominently featured. The announcement praised her extensive experience in community management and dedication to maintaining property values through high standards. Margaret read with growing concern. "This is troubling, but not our problem anymore." "It gets worse," Ted continued, scrolling down. "Look who's backing her." The final paragraph noted that Porter Community Management, a newly formed company, had secured a 5-year contract with Lakeside Manor, with options to expand to other developments owned by Westfield Properties. Westfield owns 16 communities in 3 counties, Margaret noted. "Evelyn hasn't retreated, she's expanded." Diane sighed. "Again, not our problem. We've earned our peace." "Actually," Ted hesitated. "James Porter called me this morning. He said we should check who purchased the undeveloped land behind Frank's property." A quick property records search revealed the answer. Westfield Properties had acquired the 50-acre parcel 3 weeks earlier. Their announced plan, a new high-density development called Porter Estates. "This isn't coincidence," Frank concluded when they gathered at his house later. "She's positioning herself to continue the fight from a different angle." James Porter confirmed their suspicions when he arrived. Although estranged from his mother after exposing her corruption, he still had contacts in the family business. "She's furious about having to leave Oak Ridge. This new development is specifically designed to create problems for you, especially Frank's agricultural operations." The preliminary plans showed 3-story townhomes packed tightly along the property line shared with Frank's land. The highest density section directly bordered his beehives. A proposed community recreation area would bring constant noise and activity against the edge of Diane's nature preserve. "They're designed to generate nuisance complaints," James explained. "Once new residents start calling about bee concerns and filing noise complaints about Frank's tractor, Mother will have proof that your agricultural activities are incompatible with residential use." Margaret studied the plans with her environmental lawyer's eye. These density levels would require variances from current zoning restrictions. They'd need approval from the County Planning Commission. James finished, where she still has allies despite Commissioner Blackwell's suspension. The group fell silent, contemplating this new threat. "We can't fight her forever," Diane said finally. "She has more resources, more connections, and apparently unlimited determination to make our lives miserable." Frank nodded slowly. Maybe it's time to consider other options. That evening, as Diane walked home from Frank's house, she noticed an unfamiliar car parked across from her driveway. The driver's window lowered as she approached. "Ms. Matthews, I'm David Chen, Margaret's husband. She asked me to give you this." He handed her a business card. "Sunbrook Community Land Trust, preserving natural spaces for future generations." "What is this?" Diane asked. "An alternative," David replied. "Margaret suggested we talk tomorrow, both you and Frank." The next afternoon, they gathered around the Chen's dining table as David explained the concept of a community land trust, a non-profit organization that acquires land to protect it from development and speculation. "Sunbrook already manages over 800 acres in the county," David explained. "We preserve agricultural land, create conservation easements, and maintain affordable housing programs." "And you're interested in our properties?" Frank asked skeptically. "We've been watching this situation with interest," David admitted. "Your parcels represent